I used to work the night shift at a small town hospital, a place that always carried a certain heaviness after dark. The corridors were long, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, and the air was thick with the sterile smell of disinfectant. During the day, it was bustling with doctors, nurses, and patients, but at night, everything changed. The noise died down, the hallways emptied, and silence crept in like a predator. I was a nurse on rotation, usually stationed on the third floor, where the older patients were kept. Most of them were asleep during the night shift, so my job often involved quietly checking vitals, restocking carts, and responding to the occasional call light. It should have been uneventful. But hospitals hold on to things, memories, emotions, and sometimes things you can't explain. It was around 2:45 a.m. when I started my rounds that night. I remember clearly because I had just checked my watch after finishing paperwork. The third floor was quiet. Too quiet. Most of the patients were sedated or sleeping peacefully. I began walking down the corridor, pushing an empty wheelchair back toward the storage room. That's when I heard it, the sound of soft footsteps behind me. At first I thought it was just another nurse, or maybe one of the doctors doing a late check. I slowed my pace slightly, expecting someone to pass me, but no one did. The footsteps stopped when I stopped. I glanced over my shoulder, and the hall behind me was completely empty. I brushed it off, thinking maybe the sound echoed from another floor. I reached the end of the corridor and parked the wheelchair, but then I noticed something strange. One of the patient room doors was slightly open. I was sure I had checked it earlier and closed it tight. Room 307. I knew the patient there, an elderly woman who had passed away the evening before. Her body had been moved to the morgue hours ago. A chill ran through me as I slowly approached the door. It creaked open wider, just enough for me to see inside. The bed was perfectly made, sheets tucked neatly as if no one had ever lain there. But the rocking chair in the corner, one the patient's family had brought in, was moving gently back and forth. The motion was smooth, steady, like someone invisible was sitting there rocking. I froze. My rational mind tried to find an explanation, maybe air from the vent, maybe the chair had been nudged earlier. But it didn't add up. The air in the room was completely still. I took a cautious step inside, the floor squeaking under my weight. "Hello?" I whispered, even though I knew no one was supposed to be there. The rocking chair slowed, almost as if whoever, or whatever, was in it had stopped suddenly at the sound of my voice. That's when I felt it. A presence. It's hard to describe, but the air became heavier, pressing down on my chest, making it harder to breathe. The temperature dropped so fast my breath became visible. The silence was deafening, yet I could hear the faintest whisper, like someone exhaling right behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. My pulse raced as I backed toward the door, not daring to turn my back to the chair again. Just before I stepped out, I glanced one last time and nearly screamed. The chair had stopped moving, but now the indent of someone sitting was pressed deep into the cushion. I bolted out of the room, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely write in the logbook afterward. I didn't tell anyone at the time, afraid they'd think I was overtired or losing it. But the strangest part? The next morning, when housekeeping came through, the chair in room 307 was found pushed against the wall, completely overturned, as if someone had violently kicked it. That was the night I learned that hospitals don't always sleep, even when their patients do. Some things linger long after life has left the body, and if you work the night shift, you're bound to encounter them eventually. A few years back, I worked the graveyard shift at a rundown gas station off a deserted highway. It wasn't the kind of job anyone wanted, but I needed money, and the overnight hours gave me time to study for classes. Most nights were dead quiet, just a few truckers passing through or the occasional local stopping by for cigarettes or coffee. But one night, something happened that made me quit within a week. It was late, around 12:30 a.m., and the lot outside was completely empty. The store was lit up with those harsh fluorescent lights, buzzing faintly, while outside, the world was swallowed in darkness. There were no other businesses nearby, no houses, just endless stretches of road and fields. I was leaning against the counter, scrolling through my phone, when I heard it, the sound of the door chime. Normally, the bell rang once when someone entered, but this time it let out a faint, distorted ring, almost as if it were struggling to make the sound. I looked up quickly, expecting to see a customer, but the door was shut tight. I frowned and stepped out from behind the counter, glancing around the aisles. No one. The store was completely empty. I thought maybe the wind had rattled the door, though it was an automatic one with a heavy frame. Shrugging it off, I went back behind the counter. A few minutes later, I heard a noise that made my skin crawl. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, heavy footsteps coming from aisle 3, where the chips and snacks were. My first thought was that maybe a drunk guy had slipped in without me noticing. But as I leaned over the counter to look down the aisle, I saw nothing, just rows of neatly stacked bags. Still, the sound continued, moving closer. "Hey," I called out, trying to sound firm, though my voice cracked slightly. "We're closed to loitering. If you need something, come to the register silence." I grabbed the flashlight we kept under the counter and walked around, shining it down each aisle. Nothing. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to check every corner, even the restrooms. The place was empty. When I returned to the counter, my stomach dropped. The security monitor, a set of grainy black and white feeds from cameras outside, showed something that shouldn't have been there. On the screen, right by the gas pumps, stood a tall, thin figure. It wasn't a customer. It was just a shadow. No details, no face, no clothing, just a dark silhouette standing perfectly still in the pale glow of the overhead lights. I whipped my head toward the window, but outside the lot was empty. My eyes darted back to the screen, and the figure was still there. Same position. Unmoving. My hands trembled as I reached for the phone to call the night manager, but before I could dial, the feed flickered. The figure was gone. I told myself I was imagining things, that the old cameras were glitchy, but the fear twisting in my gut said otherwise. I tried to distract myself by stocking the cooler in the back, but when I returned a few minutes later, I nearly dropped the flashlight. The automatic door was wide open. Cold night air rushed in, making the candy wrappers near the counter flutter. I hadn't heard it slide open. No chime, no sound, just wide open, like someone invisible had walked in. I rushed to the door, slamming it shut, then locked it. My heart was hammering so hard I felt dizzy. Just as I turned back toward the counter, something caught my eye. On the glass of the front door, faint and foggy, were handprints. Not one, but several. Long, stretched-out prints, higher than where a normal person would reach. They looked smeared, as though someone, or something, had been pressing its hands against the glass, peering in. I froze, staring, my breath clouding in the cold air that still lingered inside. Then, as if on cue, the door chime rang again, loud, distorted, and drawn out. But the door didn't open this time. That was it for me. I grabbed my stuff, locked the register, and sat in my car with the engine running until sunrise. When the morning clerk arrived, I tried to explain what had happened, but he just laughed and said the cameras glitched all the time, and the door sometimes acted up. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I'll never forget those handprints on the glass. Too long, too high, too unnatural. That was the last time I ever worked a night shift at that station. Back when I was working as a security guard at an office complex, I thought the job would be easy. Walk the grounds, keep an eye on the cameras, and make sure no one broke in. The building wasn't even that old, just a dull concrete block filled with cubicles and storage rooms. The company shut down every night at 7 p.m., so my shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. was usually nothing but silence. At least that's what I thought. It was around 3:15 one morning when I was sitting in the security room, half watching the bank of CCTV monitors. Most of the screens showed empty hallways, stairwells, and office floors. I was sipping stale coffee, fighting sleep, when I noticed something odd. On camera 4, the east hallway on the second floor, I saw movement. A tall, shadowy figure walked slowly across the hall. My stomach tightened. That part of the building should have been completely empty. I leaned closer to the monitor, replaying the feed in case it was a glitch. The figure was still there, moving steadily toward the end of the hall. No details, no face, just a dark outline walking past the motion sensor lights, which flickered on one by one as it passed. I grabbed my flashlight and keys, trying to convince myself it was just a late worker I hadn't noticed. When I got upstairs, the hallway was dead silent. Every office door was locked. I called out, "Security, anyone here?" No response. But when I checked the CCTV feed again back downstairs, the figure was still moving. Only now it was walking in the opposite direction. It looked like it had turned around. I felt a cold sweat run down my back. Whoever it was, they weren't making any sound. No footsteps, no doors opening, nothing. Just appearing on the screen, walking as if the hallway belonged to them. For the next hour, the figure kept showing up on different monitors, sometimes in the hallways, sometimes near the stairwell. Once, I saw it standing directly in front of the elevator, facing the camera, motionless. I knew I wasn't supposed to leave the security room unattended for long, but my curiosity got the better of me. I had to see for myself. I took the elevator up, flashlight ready, and stepped into the hallway. The lights buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow on the tiled floor. Empty. I walked slowly, sweeping my light over the walls and doors. Nothing. No sound. Just the hum of electricity. I was almost convinced I'd imagined everything until I reached the end of the hall. The elevator doors slid shut behind me with a heavy clang, even though I hadn't pressed the button. And then the lights above me flickered, one after another, like a wave traveling down the hall. When the last bulb blinked back on, I wasn't alone anymore. At the far end, near the fire exit, stood a figure. Tall, thin, shoulders hunched. It was too far to see details, but I knew instantly it wasn't just a shadow. It was standing there, solid, watching me. My breath hitched, and I froze, flashlight trembling in my hand. "Hello?" I called out, but my voice cracked. The figure didn't move. I took a step back, and that's when it shifted, its head cocked slightly to the side, like it was studying me. Then, without a sound, it began walking toward me. Not fast, slow, measured, each step echoing faintly down the corridor. I panicked, turning and running back to the elevator, but the doors wouldn't open no matter how many times I jabbed the button. My chest tightened with terror as the footsteps grew louder, closer. In a desperate move, I sprinted for the stairwell door and shoved it open. I bolted down the stairs, nearly tripping as I skipped entire steps. When I finally burst out onto the ground floor, I raced back to the security room, slamming the door shut and locking it. Heart pounding, I forced myself to look at the monitors again. The figure wasn't in the hallway anymore. It was on camera 1, standing directly outside the security room. It didn't move, didn't knock, didn't try the door. It just stood there, facing the camera, staring straight at me through the screen. I sat frozen until the first rays of dawn lit the sky, and just like that, when the sun came up, the figure was gone. I quit 2 days later. People still work night shifts in that building, But whenever I drive past it now, I can't help but think of that figure, silently watching from the hallways, waiting for someone else to notice.